Today, I'll show you everything you need to know about the DJI Mini 5 Pro and how to get the best results. I have the Fly More combo here. I'll show you what's in the box, your first steps, and how to get started, what all the buttons on the controller do, how to fly the drone, the DJI Fly app flight modes, and the best settings that will help you get the best video and images possible from this incredible little drone. If you would like to rewatch or rewind to any part of this guide at any time, I put timestamps down below to make this easy. And if you want to find out more detailed information about the DJI Mini 5 Pro or pick it up, you will also find links to do that in the video description. In addition to the drone, the Fly More combo includes the RC2 controller with a built-in screen. If you purchase a different bundle, you can also buy the Mini 5 Pro with the RCN3 controller, which allows you to use your smartphone as a display. Apart from that, the operation is almost identical. In addition to the extremely high-quality shoulder bag, there are 2 additional batteries. So a total of 3 batteries, a charging hub, a few spare propellers in case you damage one, and, very importantly, an ND filter set. Later on, I'll show you in which situations you should definitely use ND filters, and at the very end of the video, how to replace the propellers. Now let's take a closer look at the drone. The drone has a power button on the back. When you press it briefly for the first time, you activate the battery. From then on, you can check the battery's charge status by simply pressing the button and looking at the number of LED lights that light up. Remove the storage cover by pulling the tab backward and then removing it. Always attach it during transport to protect the gimbal. To do this, bend the propellers inward, hook the tab back into the openings here, and then pull the cover down over the front. Unfold the arms by turning the upper arms outwards to the sides and the lower arms from back to front. As soon as you unfold the rear right arm, the Mini 5 switches on automatically. When you fold the rear arm back, it switches off again automatically. You can prevent this automatic switching off by pressing a button. And, of course, you can also switch the Mini 5 Pro on and off manually. To do this, press the power button and then press and hold it. The Mini 5 Pro has sensors at the front, rear and bottom. It also has an additional light on the bottom to enable landing even in poor lighting conditions. The camera is mounted on a gimbal to enable smooth and perfectly stabilized shots. There is a small button on the left side. This is the quick transfer button. With this button, you can quickly and easily transfer videos and photos to your smartphone via quick transfer. Of course, you can also transfer recordings via cable and the USB-C port on the back. And if you don't have the charging hub, you can also use this port to charge the drone's battery. To remove a battery, press the 2 buttons on the side inward and then pull the battery out toward the back. You can easily reinstall the battery by sliding it in from the back with the label facing up. The Mini 5 Pro has 42 GB of internal storage. That should be enough for multiple flights and recordings. But of course, you can expand the storage by using microSD cards. The SD card slot is located on the back, right next to the USB-C port. To avoid problems, you should use a fast card. Ideally an SD card with a speed rating of V30 and A2, such as this card from Lexar. I'll put a link to it in the video description. If you ever damage the propellers of your Mini 5 Pro, you can replace them yourself. It's not that complicated, but it's important to note that there are 2 types of propellers. Type A propellers have an orange arrow pointing to the right, and Type B propellers have a white arrow pointing to the left. Once you have turned on the drone, you can see its status from the LED lights on the back. As a general rule, if they flash green, everything is fine and there is a connection to a satellite signal. If they flash red, something is wrong. For example, the battery is empty. At the moment, they are flashing yellow because the remote is not connected. So now it's time to take a closer look at the remote controller. This is the RC2 remote controller. It has a built-in screen. When using the RCN3 controller, you use your smartphone as the screen. Apart from that, the 2 controllers are very similar and their operation is almost identical. Before use, you should always unfold the antennas. On the RC2 controller, you will find the 2 control sticks at the back in the storage slots. You can simply take them out and screw them in at the front. Of course, you use the 2 control sticks to control the drone. Apart from that, the remote controller has a number of physical buttons. This is the power button, and you turn on the remote control in exactly the same way as the drone, by pressing the power button once briefly, and then pressing and holding the button a second time. In the middle, you will find the flight mode switch. This allows you to switch between the flight modes Cine, Normal and Sport. The flight mode primarily affects the speed of the drone. While the normal mode is well suited for most situations, the flight speed is limited in Cine mode, which allows for particularly stable and cinematic shots. In Sport mode, on the other hand, the drone can fly faster. But be careful, in this mode, obstacle avoidance is automatically deactivated. This is the pause or return to home button. You can use it to stop the drone in an emergency, interrupt an automated flight mode, or initiate a return to home. The record button is located at the front left to start and stop recording. To the right is the focus or shutter button. Pressing it halfway refocuses the camera. Pressing it all the way in takes a photo. The left dial is the gimbal dial, which controls the tilt of the gimbal. And the right dial is the camera control dial, which can be used to zoom in and out in the default settings. And there are two customizable buttons on the back, C1 on the left and C2 on the right. The RC2 remote controller also has internal storage for saving screen recordings or offline maps, for example. You can expand this storage via the SD card slot on the front, and you can use the USB-C port to transfer your screen recordings to your computer. But of course, you can also use it to charge the remote control. And here too, if you press the power button once briefly, you can see the charging status by the number of LED lights that light up. Now we are familiar with both devices. Next, we need to activate them and perform a firmware update. Before using them for the first time, you should fully charge the drone's battery and the remote controller. As already shown, you can now turn on the remote controller and the drone by pressing the power button and then pressing it again and holding it for at least 2 seconds. Basically, the DJI Fly app is pre-installed on the RC2 remote. If you are using the RCN Free, you must download and install the DJI Fly app before using it for the first time. You can find the app in the iOS App Store or for Android on the DJI homepage. The status LED of the remote controller is located at the top left. As always, if it lights up green, the Mini 5 Pro is connected and everything is fine. Mine lights up red, which means the drone is not connected. So let's turn on the drone as well. The drone and remote controller should connect automatically if they were purchased together. If, like me, you're using the RC2 remote, you will need to connect the controller to your home Wi-Fi, as you will need an active internet connection for activation and updates. Once that's done, you can activate both devices and update them immediately. You should always install updates right away, as they not only fix bugs and provide security updates, but also often add new features. It is also important that you log into your DJI account before you make your first flight, if only because the maximum altitude and distance of the drone may be limited without logging in. In addition, it may be necessary to log in at certain intervals. Therefore, after a long break, it may be a good idea to turn on the drone and the remote at home before flying and log in. Otherwise, the drone's flight capabilities may be restricted again. To ensure you always have an active internet connection when flying, you can create a hotspot with your smartphone. It's very easy to do. Swipe down twice with your finger and tap and hold the Wi-Fi icon. Now you can connect to your smartphone's hotspot and have an active internet connection even when you're away from your home Wi-Fi, allowing you to log in at any time. This also has the advantage of allowing you to download new maps. We'll see why this is interesting in a moment. If you use the RCN Free controller, you usually don't have the problem of a missing internet connection, of course. Now we are actually ready for the first flight. But before we take off, we should take a closer look at the flight interface so that you know what information is displayed here and which information is particularly important. As soon as the drone and the remote control connect, the app automatically switches to the flight interface. If this is not the case, press Go Fly here in the app. Let's take a look at the line at the top. The drone is currently in N mode, which is the normal flight mode. If I switch to Cine or Sport on the remote control, the letter will also change here. Right next to it, you'll see important status information. In my case, it says in flight. If the message here is highlighted in orange or red, for example, then your attention is required. On the right hand side, you will find the drone's battery level, which in my case is 85%. And right next to it, the remaining flight time. The icon to the right of it represents the connection strength between the drone and the remote controller, which should always be good in order to control the drone properly. But don't worry, if it should actually be interrupted, a return to home will be initiated automatically and the drone will fly back to the home point. The icon next to it stands for obstacle avoidance. So whether it is active. Remember that obstacle avoidance is automatically deactivated in sport mode. And the icon to the right of it and the value stand for the satellite connection, or the GNSS signal. And this is extremely important for several reasons. For better and more reliable control of the drone, to find the drone in case of loss, or for an improved return to home function. In addition, the maximum flight altitude may be limited without a strong GNSS signal. You should therefore always make sure that a strong satellite signal has been detected before takeoff. Although it must be said that the Mini 5 Pro can also perform a return to home even without a signal. Tapping on the three dots in the upper right corner opens the main menu. Here you will find the settings for safety, control, camera and transmission. We will need this menu for various settings a little later. On the right hand side there is an additional shutter button and the icon for the shooting modes and for the album of your recordings. At the bottom right you can see the current camera settings. I will show you how to optimally set up the Mini 5 Pro in a moment. The information here on the left hand side is also very important. It shows the altitude, distance and flight speed. We will see later that you can adjust the maximum altitude. In the lower left corner you will see the map with the drone marked as an arrow and the home point as a yellow H. The position of the remote control, which is usually your position, is shown as a blue dot. If you tap on the map, it will be displayed in full screen and the camera preview will be displayed as a small picture-in-picture. Remember that we are often not connected to the internet with the RC2 controller. Therefore, it can be useful to download certain maps for offline use. And this is very easy to do. To do this, switch to the main overview of the app via the house icon in the upper left corner and tap on Profile. Here you can download the maps for specific areas. But let's return to the flight interface. On the left side you will find the icons for auto takeoff, focus track and waypoints. I think it's time for us to make our first flight. For your first flight I recommend an open area away from crowds. An area without too many obstacles where you can practice well. Personally, I always use a landing pad to prevent damage to the underside of the drone and the sensors. It's best to position the drone so that you are looking at it from behind. Now you can turn on the drone and the remote. Don't forget to unfold the antennas on the remote. There are now two ways to take off, either manually or by using the auto takeoff function. As we have already seen, the auto takeoff function is located on the left hand side. Tap on it and then press and hold the circle in the middle, or press and hold the C1 button at the back. The motors will now switch on and the drone will take off and hover at a height of 1.2 meters. Personally, I prefer a manual takeoff. To do this, press both control sticks diagonally down and inwards or diagonally down and outwards at the same time. Either works. The motors will now turn on and you can take off by pushing the left stick upwards. If you release both sticks, the drone will simply hover in place. The controls are relatively simple and just require a little practice at the beginning. In the default settings, the Mini 5 Pro is controlled as follows. When you push the left stick up, the drone ascends. Pushing it down causes it to descend. Pushing the left stick to the left causes the drone to turn left around its own axis. And pushing it to the right causes it to turn right around its own axis. This allows you to fly curves or turn the drone around in the air. Pushing the right stick up causes the Mini 5 Pro to accelerate and fly forward. If you push it backward, the drone flies backward. And if you push the right stick to the left, it flies sideways to the left. If you push it to the right, it flies sideways to the right. Of course, you can combine several movements, which is necessary for interesting flight maneuvers. For example, you can fly forward and ascend at the same time. Or you can fly to the left and turn to the right at the same time to fly in an orbit, for example. As you can see, you can create interesting flight maneuvers by combining several commands. And there is one more movement you should definitely know for interesting shots. You can use the dial on the front left to tilt the camera up and down. Combining this movement with a flight movement can also lead to good results. For example, you could fly forward while simultaneously tilting the camera from bottom to top. But please keep one thing in mind. Although there are a number of interesting flight maneuvers, you will usually get the best shots with simple movements. If you press the C1 button on the back in the default settings, the gimbal automatically rotates the camera completely downward for a top-down shot. Press it again to center the camera again. Also interesting, if you hold down C1 and turn the dial on the front right, which is the zoom dial, the camera will turn to the side. But as I said, while this looks cool, it's not suitable for all situations. Flying forward, ascending at the same time, and perhaps also tilting the camera down at the same time, that sounds complicated and difficult to implement. But there is one important feature that greatly simplifies complex flight maneuvers: cruise control. To activate this feature, you need to assign it to one of the two customizable buttons on the back. I recommend C2 as we need C1 for other functions. Tap on the three dots in the top right corner, go to the main menu, under Control, and assign the cruise control feature to the C2 button. When you're then flying and moving the drone in one direction and press the C2 button, the drone will automatically continue flying in exactly the same direction. This also applies to lateral movements, ascending or descending, or a gimbal tilt. Now you can let the drone continue flying and concentrate on other controls, such as changing the gimbal tilt. You can deactivate the feature by releasing both sticks and pressing C2 again, or by cancelling cruise control here. The Mini 5 Pro has obstacle avoidance in all directions, and if you have not deactivated the feature, the drone will automatically brake when it gets too close to an obstacle. If you open the main menu and select Safety, you can also choose to have the drone attempt to fly around an obstacle instead of braking when it detects one. This is a very interesting feature, and you can also disable obstacle avoidance completely here. Remember that it is automatically disabled in Sport mode. And if you need to brake quickly in Sport mode or in general, simply press the pause button on the left and the drone will brake immediately. If you're logged into your DJI account at the beginning and the initial flight restrictions have been deactivated, you can set the maximum flight altitude and distance in the main menu. In the EU, the maximum altitude that can be set is 120 meters, which is also the limit for flying without a drone license in most countries. Now we know how to fly the Mini 5 Pro. Let's take some shots. To start and stop recording a video, press the record button on the front left. Pressing the right shutter button switches to photo mode, and pressing it again takes a photo. Pressing the left record button again switches back to video mode. The Mini 5 Pro does not have an optical zoom. However, you can zoom in and out using the dial on the front right. This allows for up to a 3x zoom factor. However, I would not generally recommend this, as it is a purely digital zoom. You will achieve the best image quality if you always shoot at a factor of 1x. If necessary, you can also switch to 2x. I would avoid zoom factors in between or above this for optimal image quality. The Mini 5 Pro has an extremely useful feature for shooting social media content. When you tap this icon above the zoom factors, the gimbal rotates the camera to the side and switches to vertical portrait mode. This allows you to take vertical shots without cropping or losing quality. And this is an absolutely cool feature. The Mini 5 Pro does not have a fixed focus, and especially when you're shooting very close subjects, you can create a slightly blurred background, which looks very cinematic. However, it's also important that the right subject is in focus. In the default settings, the Mini 5 Pro uses autofocus, which usually works very well. There are rarely any problems, especially when shooting landscapes. If you have the impression that the focus is not right, you can press the right shutter button halfway in. Then the camera will refocus. This works in both video and photo mode. And if you have the impression that the camera is focusing on the wrong subject, you can also tap the subject with your finger to focus on it correctly. Now not only the focus, but also the exposure will be adjusted to this subject. By dragging the sun icon up and down, you can also adjust the exposure and make it brighter or darker. And if you tap and hold, the automatic exposure will even be fixed and will not change even if the lighting conditions change. If you tap and hold the focus icon, you can manually adjust the focus by swiping up and down. In this case, it will no longer adjust automatically. If you want to adjust the focus manually, it would be useful to activate focus peaking so that you can see what is currently in focus. To do this, open the main menu by tapping on the three dots in the top right corner. Go to the camera menu and select normal under peaking level. Now you can see what is currently in focus by the red lines. This feature is essential if you want to focus manually with the Mini 5 Pro. Once you have found the right focus and optimal exposure, taken a few shots and are ready to land the Mini 5 Pro, you can either fly it back to the landing point manually or initiate an automated return to home by pressing and holding the return to home button. The Mini 5 Pro will automatically initiate the return to home if the connection to the remote control is lost or if the battery is low. Let's say you've moved during your flight and you don't want the drone to return to its actual starting point, but rather to fly to where you are now. To do this, you need to update the home point. You can do this by tapping on the icon on the left and updating the home point. And here is a very useful tip. If you select dynamic home point here, the home point will be continuously updated to the position of the remote control. However, this only works with the RC2 remote. The function is also available in the main menu under Safety. And there are a few other useful settings in this context. You should always ensure that the drone flies high enough during the automated return flight. To do this, you can set the return flight altitude here under Auto Return to Home Altitude. However, if you have set return to home to optimal, and the lighting conditions are good, the drone will plan the optimal flight route and fly back independently of the set altitude. If you do not want this, you must set preset here. If you want to cancel the return to home flight, simply press the return to home button again. Otherwise, the Mini 5 Pro will land at the registered home point. And here's the important thing. Only if you have ascended at least 7 meters during takeoff without moving horizontally and the conditions are good, will the drone land automatically with absolute precision, for example on a landing pad. But of course, you can also land the drone without using the return to home feature. To do this, fly to the landing point and tap the landing icon on the left. Now tap and hold the circle in the middle, just like you did for takeoff. Or simply push the left stick down to land. Now push the left stick down again and hold it, and the motors will switch off. Normally, you should switch off the drone before switching off the remote control. Now you know how to fly the Mini 5 Pro and how to take a recording. But how do you get the best possible results with the Mini 5 Pro? What are the best settings for video and photos? You can see the recording settings at the bottom right. On the left is the remaining recording time, and here is the resolution and frame rate. If you tap on it, you can change the settings. For optimal results, I would always shoot in 4K with the Mini 5 Pro. The optimal frame rate is not so clear. In general, the more frames per second, the smoother and more natural a recording looks. A frame rate of 30 frames per second therefore looks smoother and more natural than 24 or 25 frames per second. Nevertheless, many prefer a low frame rate. This is because professional movies are recorded at 24 frames per second. And if you want to achieve a cinematic look, you should definitely shoot at such a low frame rate. However, this has the disadvantage that the recording can appear very choppy, especially when there is a lot of movement. To prevent this, you definitely need motion blur when using a low frame rate. I'll show you how to create motion blur in a moment. In contrast, 60 frames per second look even smoother than 30 frames per second. What's more, with 60 frames per second, you can also create a slow motion recording of up to 40% if required. But for truly spectacular slow motion shots, you should switch to the slow motion mode. To do this, tap the shooting mode icon above the shutter button. In slow motion mode, you can shoot in 4K at 120 frames per second. This allows you to take very cool slow motion shots. However, a high frame rate is a disadvantage in low light conditions. Therefore, in the evening or when it's not particularly bright, you should use a low frame rate so that the sensor can capture more light. If you are unsure which frame rate to use at the beginning, I would recommend 30 frames per second. EV is also very important. It allows you to adjust the automatic exposure and make the shot a little brighter or darker. Very bright areas in the image in particular can sometimes be overexposed and burn out. To prevent this, it often makes sense to set a slightly negative value here, but be aware that this value will affect all subsequent shots, which was not the case with the previous correction using the sun icon. If you activate the Pro mode at the bottom right, you can adjust the exposure completely manually. This is recommended for particularly cinematic shots at a low frame rate. To do this, tap on the exposure settings and adjust them here. If you are filming at a frame rate of 24 frames per second, which is considered very cinematic, you should manually set the shutter speed twice that value. That is 1/50th. This generates the optimal amount of motion blur. Now you can also set the ISO value manually or leave it on automatic. When it comes to the ISO value, the lower the better, so 100 would be the optimal value. But even if these settings were optimal, the exposure with a shutter speed of 1/50th is much too bright in daylight. We therefore need a way to darken the shot. And this is where the ND filters, which are also included in the creator combo, come into play. On a very bright day around noon, you can try ND 128. To attach the ND filter, turn off the drone. Place the filter on the lens from below so that the lettering matches the lettering on the lens. Then press the filter in at the top. Now turn on the drone and open the settings again. If you have to use an ISO value above 400 in the settings for correct exposure, this means that the filter is too strong and you should use a weaker filter. If you open the menu on the left, you can manually adjust the white balance, which I rarely do on the Mini 5 Pro. The color setting is much more important. HLG enables the reproduction of particularly bright highlights and thus a much higher contrast. However, you also need a screen that is capable of displaying such bright highlights. For example, the screen of a modern smartphone. So if you often view your recordings on your smartphone, this is an interesting option. If, on the other hand, you want to edit the colors of your recordings, you should activate D-Log M. This is a flat color profile with a slightly wider dynamic range, which is very well suited for color grading. However, the recordings have little saturation and contrast, and you will definitely need to edit them. DJI makes this step easier for you by providing a conversion LUT that converts your D-Log-M recordings into high contrast recordings with a single click. You can download this LUT for free. I'll put a download link in the description. If you activate Color Display Assist, you can see what the footage will look like after conversion. But this is only a preview and has no effect on the actual footage. Here, under Storage, you can choose whether the recording should be saved to the SD card or the drone's internal memory. But there is another interesting setting. To find it, open the main menu and go to Camera, where you will find Style. Here you can adjust the sharpness and noise reduction. For a cinematic look, you should reduce the sharpness a little. Pros will reduce the sharpness to -2. If necessary and the footage looks too soft, you can also add sharpness in post. Yes, that's a lot of information at once. I would summarize it as follows. For the beginning, 4K30 with automatic mode and the normal color profile works well. If you want to get the most out of the Mini 5 Pro camera and take cinematic shots, then you should use D-Log-M, use ND filters, and set the shutter speed manually to 1/50th. It's similar for photos. The default settings are fine for the beginning, but for optimal results, you should increase the resolution to 50 megapixels and use JPEG and RAW as the format. RAW images contain significantly more information than JPEG files and can therefore be edited much better, but this is only necessary and useful if you want to edit your photos. In addition to the photo and video modes, the Mini 5 Pro also has a panorama mode for particularly wide landscape shots and a hyperlapse mode, in which photos are taken at specific intervals and then merged into a clip and stabilized. So it's a kind of time-lapse recording with movement. But I find the Mini 5 Pro's intelligent flight modes more interesting. There are 4 of them: MasterShots, QuickShots, Waypoints and Focus Track. And we should definitely take a closer look at these, as they are among the absolute highlights of this drone. Let's start with Focus Track. It's easy to explain. The camera follows a subject. This is a screen recording of my remote control. To activate the function, tap the Focus Track icon on the left. Now you can start Focus Track by tapping the plus sign in the camera view or by dragging a frame over a subject. There are 3 options here: Spotlight, Active Track or POI. Spotlight is active by default. In Spotlight mode, the drone hovers in place and points the camera at the subject. You can manually change the position of the drone and add movement to a shot yourself. If you select Active Track, the drone will actively follow the subject. But that's not all. You can manually adjust the position of the drone using the trace wheel. The drone will then fly to the specified position and follow the subject from the specified position. Of course, you can also adjust the position of the drone manually. Here you can change the type of subject and, via the settings icon in the upper left corner of the trace wheel, you can also adjust the predefined height and radius. If you activate the automatic mode, the drone will try to find the optimal position for tracking depending on the environment. In addition to Spotlight and Active Track, there is also POI. When you select POI, the drone will fly in a circle around the subject. You can also set the speed and direction here. As you can see, even without much experience with this feature, you can already fly relatively complex flight maneuvers. The icon for waypoints can also be found here on the left-hand side. As the name suggests, you can use it to set individual waypoints, which the drone will then fly to fully automatically. It's very easy to do. You fly to the first waypoint, set the camera angle and add the point. You can do this by using the plus sign or by pressing the C1 button on the back. Now you fly to the second waypoint and add that one too, and so on. If you tap on the 3 dots on the right, you can also adjust the speed. You can even change and adjust the waypoints on the map, or even change the camera orientation. If you tap on individual waypoints, you can set the altitude or camera action for that waypoint. And under POI, you can set specific points of interest and assign them to specific waypoints. The drone's camera will then always point at this point of interest. When you're done, press Go, and the drone will fly to the waypoints in sequence. In the Shooting Modes menu, you will find the icon for MasterShots. This is a shooting mode that not only flies a predefined flight maneuver, but also automatically takes recordings. To do this, select a subject and set a few parameters. When you tap Start, the drone will fly several predefined flight maneuvers depending on the subject and take a number of short shots. You can then view the shots individually or combine them into a longer clip. You have more control with QuickShots. Here you can choose from a range of predefined flight maneuvers. You select a subject, for example yourself, set various parameters such as altitude or distance, and the drone will fly the maneuver fully automatically and also take a shot automatically. There is the maneuver drone, in which the Mini 5 flies backwards while taking a shot of the subject. With rocket, the drone will ascend and film from above, and then descend again. With circle, the drone will fly around the subject in a similar way to POI. With helix, the drone will fly backwards, ascend, and circle the subject at the same time. With boomerang, the drone will circle the subject in an oval path. With asteroid, the drone will fly backwards, ascend, take a panorama, and finally stitch everything together into a clip. And with rotate, which is actually the first quick shot on the list, no subject is required. The drone will fly forward or backward while rotating the camera sideways. We have now made a few good flights and taken some nice shots. There are several ways to transfer your recordings. Of course, you can do this directly via the SD card, by connecting the drone to your computer via cable, or via the DJI Fly app. And then there is the interesting quick transfer option. Ideally, you should first activate camera allow quick transfer in sleep in the main menu. Now you can turn off the drone after the flight and tap quick transfer in the Fly app. Alternatively, you can also activate the quick transfer mode by pressing the side button. You can now connect your Mini 5 even when it is turned off and packed away, and download your recordings. Now you know everything you need to know to successfully take good shots with your Mini 5 Pro. If you do happen to crash, you can find your drone relatively easily with the Find My Drone function. You can find this feature on the map or via your profile. And look at this, a broken propeller. Funnily enough, my drone didn't crash, it just fell off the table here in the office. But the propeller is extremely easy to replace. Hold the black plastic ring with 2 fingers. With your other hand, press the propeller down and turn it in the opposite direction of the arrow, which in the case of the orange arrows is to the left. Select the propellers of the same color, in my case propellers of type A, and turn them back in the same way, only this time in the direction of the arrow. And that's it. I wish you a lot of fun with your drone. Give me a like as feedback if you found this video interesting. Links to the Mini 5 Pro and the most important accessories can be found in the description. There will be more tutorials on the Mini 5 Pro. So stay tuned and see you next time.